We will dive right in. Welcome, welcome. Happy Thursday, everybody. So today we're hanging out with Tony and Kelly from EXP Technical. Is it technical, right? EXP Technical? Yeah. So today's topic is a hot one. Many of us started out as admins, even many of our old past presenters. So doing basic IT tasks like password resets, purchasing software, resetting servers. IT is a super broad subject. There's a lot of technology and tools that people work with. And so what we're going to touch on is IT operations and cybersecurity. So they've kind of separated it into two buckets. And so for basic IT functions, it's listed as one of the top skills that every manager and admin should have, especially to be successful in your role. Many of us wear like 14 different hats. So this is definitely a topic worth mastering. So this means we must be comfortable with technology, learning new software, troubleshooting, speaking with other professionals like Tony and Kelly. So if you're wondering where to start and best practices, these two are going to dive in deeper. They're going to teach us some IT analyst skills and identifying other ways to solve problems. They're also going to share some amazing resources. In this PDF, they're going to just give us additional resources for training, and their website's actually pretty awesome. And check out their LinkedIn, which I will send as well. Tony, I was telling Kelly earlier, you guys are the most fascinating IT professionals I've ever met. It's kind of like meeting a really social, amazing accountant. It's pretty rare, you guys.
Thank you.
Going through your bios and researching you guys, like literally, we could probably just do an hour just on you, just your backgrounds and interests. I tried to water it down a little. So Tony, I'll start with you. And so Tony is the managing principal, over 20 years of IT experience. He's got a bachelor's degree in computing and information systems, of course, honors. He's held leadership roles in IT consulting, cloud services. He was a director of IT at a national healthcare company, and he also has the coolest British accent. And he, random fact is, he met his wife on a dance floor in Spain, and he promises if there's more time at the end of this, he's going to reenact the dance. So we're taking a couple minutes. And for Kelly, he's the director of sales and marketing, got a bachelor's in accounting from the University of Arizona. Prior to working at EXP, had 3 decades of success in technology sales and sales leadership roles. He's on a personal note, he's gone on a lot of trips, won flat screen TVs. He's got a bookshelf of pointy glass awards, which pictures or it didn't happen. And I heard he rocked a Goofy suit for 20 minutes on a character set for Disney. So that we'd love to see, as well as Tony's dancing. And
they didn't let me keep the suit.
I'm sure we can find a background on Zoom sometime. So that is all I've got. Take it away.
Okay, well, I will jump in with the presentation materials that we prepared. And in preparing for this meeting, we were given a few prompts, so we're trying to address as many of those as we can in our presentation here. If we jump around, if it feels like we're covering a lot of different topics, that's the reason why. And can you confirm, can you see the PowerPoint presentation right now? I see heads nodding. Okay, good. So at EXP Technical, I see several familiar faces and familiar fonts, even in this small group here. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We've been in business for 20 years, and we provide IT support to approximately about 300 small and medium-sized businesses all across the Pacific Northwest, but primarily Washington State and primarily the Puget Sound region here. And about half of our clients are architectural, engineering, and construction firms. And even among that, over 100 of our clients are architectural firms. So we have a lot of relevant experience in some of the industries and some of the businesses in which the folks attending this presentation work. I'll just jump. Oh, and our topic today, so we're talking about IT and cybersecurity. We're talking about IT operations, cybersecurity. And as I mentioned, we're going to jump around from one topic to another. So we'll hit on a lot of different issues as we go here. And so let's see if I'm doing this right. So I'll start with an image that harkens back to my childhood. And this is one that I didn't realize it at the time, but Mel Brooks and Buck Henry were teaching us about cybersecurity. This is the opening credit sequence from Get Smart. And I don't know if you remember that or not, but it featured Secret Agent Maxwell Smart, and he arrives at this nondescript building and he goes down into the basement and he has to pass through each of these different layers of security in order to get to control headquarters. And at each door, presumably he's passing some sort of test or some sort of validation. And he's entering through this bunker and this secure environment. And eventually he gets to a phone booth and he enters a number and he drops down the elevator into the control headquarters. And one thing that they're illustrating there is a cybersecurity concept that's called defense in depth, or a layered approach to security. And it's the idea that no one control is a silver bullet, but each one mitigates risk. And so if you layer all these different approaches, you make an environment much more secure. And we're going to start with a few recommendations that come from EXP. And Tony and I were joking earlier today, we really could have the top 110 recommendations to protect your business. But this short list is a list of items that in many cases are low cost or no cost and very high impact. And some of these may be familiar to you, but I'll go down the list. One is enable multi-factor authentication everywhere. And multi-factor authentication now is probably not a new term to this audience, but that's using different types of credentials when you log in to validate that you are who you say you are. And typically that's a combination of something that you know, something that you have, and something that you are. And so something that you know could be a password, something that you have might be a cell phone with an authenticator app on it. Something that you are might be your fingerprints or your retinas that could be scanned by a biometric reader. But the idea is that if you use these multiple credentials, you know, your password might be compromised, but the attacker probably doesn't have your fingerprints or they don't have your cell phone. And so multiple credentials enable greater security. And in fact, in the Microsoft Digital Defense Report from 2021, they indicated at that time that they felt that multi-factor authentication would prevent 99% of successful phishing attacks. And in that report, they said it was shocking, though, that less than 20% of their clients were employing multi-factor authentication everywhere. And then more recently in 2022, the update to that report, they didn't use the word shocking, but they still referred to MFA as basic cyber hygiene. One more note on this before I belabor the point too much, and that is that if you are pursuing cyber insurance, it's a prerequisite for any insurance policy. In fact, we've recently, a prospective client came to us who had a policy in place and their coverage was reduced because they didn't have multi-factor authentication everywhere, and an audit revealed that. So it's critically important not just to protect your organization, but if you're wanting to qualify for insurance or please regulators and auditors, et cetera. So another recommendation is to employ spam filtering with advanced threat protection. And some of these features are in products that you might already have, like Microsoft 365 Business Premium. But advanced threat protection tools are advanced filters for like setting anti-phishing thresholds and spoof intelligence detection and mailbox intelligence that looks at your behaviors, and you can specify controls so that end users, so that people don't get bombarded with phishing attacks. It keeps the bad guys away from you and your staff so that you're less likely to fall for those sorts of attacks. Another one is upgrade antivirus to an endpoint detection and response solution. And this might be a little bit different than what you're familiar with. Traditional antivirus is signature-based or definition-based. And so it's kind of like a no-fly list. It has a list of things that it won't permit. Endpoint detection and response is often referred to as next generation antivirus, and it's not signature-based, it's behavior-based. So it uses artificial intelligence to spot threatening behaviors. And if a behavior is threatening, if it's performing an activity that it shouldn't, or if it's anomalous, if it's out of the ordinary, it will shut that process down. So if a process tries to encrypt your hard drive, an EDR solution doesn't care if it knows what that threat is, it just knows that it's threatening behavior and it will stop it before it can take effect. So for that reason, it's very effective against ransomware and a lot of the attacks that you read about in the paper these days. Another recommendation is that you back up your data often, you monitor your backups, perform test restores regularly. I would add a couple of other caveats to that. One is people often forget or they assume that their data in the cloud is backed up. Service level agreements from hosted services providers, SaaS, and infrastructure as a service might guarantee uptime, but they don't necessarily guarantee that your data isn't corrupted or that you could restore, say, an email from months ago. And for that reason, it's important that you have cloud-to-cloud backup, that you have backup mechanisms in place for that. Critically important that you test regularly, perform test restores. It happens often that we come into a new computing environment that we're not familiar with. And the first time we go to restore data, we realize that the last good backup is 6 months old. And you want to do that test restore, retrieve a random file on a day like today when birds are chirping and you're not trying to recover from a ransomware attack. You don't want to find out at the worst possible moment that your last good backup is 6 months old. And then one other point on backups too, in this age of ransomware, it's important that there's an air gap between your working environment and your backup environment, because one of the things that ransomware wants to do is encrypt your backups right away as well. And then the last item on this page is engage in security awareness training. Now, the people are the soft targets, and they're the easiest targets to exploit. And for that reason, it's important to educate your staff. This is a meme that we posted on LinkedIn a little while back, and I don't mean it to be insulting, because in fact, I grew up using a rotary phone that had a cord and was attached to the wall. But the idea when we posted it is that if you're of a certain age, you probably have access to a lot of sensitive data. And so for that reason, it's wise to enroll in security awareness training. But I guess the good news too is that those of us that are Gen Xers or baby boomers tend to be a little bit more suspicious of our online world. And from what I've seen of some studies, it's actually millennials and Gen Z that are more trusting. So in fact, we all need security awareness training, because we're all a prime target for people that want to do us harm. So with that in mind, one thing that we've done at eXp Technical is we've created a security awareness training curriculum, and this is available for free. What happened was, over years, we've been nagging clients and saying you should buy this paid training course, or you should bring our consulting staff in. And some would adopt those recommendations, but many would not. And excuse me, sorry about that. Some would adopt those recommendations, many would not. And rather than nagging them, we decided, let's build the best security awareness training that we can and make that available at no charge, because we live, learn, work, and play in this region. We want our neighbors to be secure. We want the business community to be vital and secure. And so we created about 6 months ago, we launched eXp Academy, and it's our free technology training site. And the most popular course there is security awareness training. It's 7 chapters, 25 lessons. It has learning is reinforced with quizzes throughout. It ends with a certificate of completion. So that's available to you when you complete the course, and you can validate that your staff has completed the training. And again, it's completely free. There's no premium content that you have to pay extra for. There's no advertising within the courses. It's all available for free. And the blue screen that you see there is from one of the lessons in our security awareness training at eXp Academy. And this is with respect to phishing and spear phishing attacks. And one of the things that we promote, and this isn't unique to eXp, but it's the SLAM acronym that you can use to evaluate suspicious email. And remember, phishing attacks and spear phishing attacks, these are kind of imposter or impersonation attacks. It's when somebody poses as a trusted individual or a trusted institution, and they try to use that veil of trust to trick you into doing something that you shouldn't, like giving up your passwords or clicking on a link or launching an application that you shouldn't. And so one of the ways that you can evaluate a suspicious email is to keep this SLAM acronym in mind. And the first is sender. And so you want to look carefully at the sender. Where you're expecting to receive email from this person, from this institution. Do you have an account with them? Is there any connection there? And does the sender match, does the purported sender match the organization that they claim to represent? Last week on my personal account, I got email from Geek Squad, and the return to address was a Gmail email address. And so clearly, I mean, that's somebody phishing me. It's not a Geek Squad, or Best Buy would not send me email from a Gmail account. Then the next step is you can also look at links for something that's suspicious in the link. And hopefully most of you already know this trick, but if you're in an email message and you hover over the link without clicking on it, you'll see the URL that link leads to. And I think this was also true of that email that I saw. It didn't lead to a bestbuy.com domain or a geeksquad.com domain. It led somewhere else, which is another indication that this is somebody attacking me, or they're trying to launch a phishing attack against me. Another is to be very careful and very suspicious of the attachments that are attached to email messages. Just because something says invoice or expense report, or has a name that might be familiar to your job role, doesn't mean that you need to click on the attachment. Be very careful, and again, go back to the sender or the link. Is this somebody you have an account with? Is there a reason for them to be sending this to you? And then finally, the M in SLAM is message. And years ago, well, not years ago, a couple of months ago, it used to be that you could spot phishing emails because of bad grammar and bad spelling. And I think in the future, that's going to be less and less and less common, because artificial intelligence makes bad grammar kind of a thing of the past. You can use GPT and other sources to write emails and communication that sounds like it comes from a native English speaker, even if it's from somebody who doesn't speak English as their first language. But one thing that in the message that a lot of phishing and spear phishing attacks do have in common is an appeal to urgency. And so that's a red flag. If you get an email that says, something like, this is your power company and we're shutting off your electricity at 2:30 p.m. unless you act. Or if you get somebody that's posing as an executive or maybe a friend, but they say, I need you to buy gift cards and I'm in a meeting, you can't respond to me, I just need you to go do this now, I want to present them before the meeting is over. That appeal to urgency is a hallmark of a phishing attack, and it's one that should really get your spidey sense tingling. And then before we move on, I'll mention, what can you do when you think you're being phished? Well, what you don't want to do is respond directly to that attack. You don't want to click the links. You don't want to reply. You don't want to, if it's somebody on the phone, if this is a voice phishing attack, you don't want to let them transfer you to their billing department. Instead, you should use another channel, a separate channel from the one that they're contacting you with, to validate the legitimacy of the message. And so if it's a suspicious email that looks like it comes from Bank of America, go to the website, look for their main number, contact them, contact the department that you think this might have come from to validate that it's legit. Similarly, for your utilities or whatever that case may be, if it's an individual that you know, contact them directly and ask, hey, did you really mean for me to buy these gift cards? And the challenge with that, and this may be your marching orders or your challenge after this meeting, is in order for that to work, you have to establish a culture that values cybersecurity. Too often, there are fear-based incentives. People get mocked for clicking on the wrong link, or they get, some sort of punishment. They're forced to go to mandatory cybersecurity awareness training. But there's some sort of negative impact for speaking up about a security concern. And it should be the opposite. There should be positive reward, reinforcement. Executives, supervisors should always welcome somebody on their team coming up and saying, hey, I got this suspicious email. Did you really mean to send that to me? So something to keep in mind there. And we'll move on to a few new threats that we see that are popping up. One thing, I don't know if any of you were in attendance at our recent webinar, we've hosted a couple of webinars where we've enlisted the FBI to join us and to speak to business leaders in the community. And one thing that they started reporting on last year is this dual extortion component of ransomware. And what we mean by that is they'll encrypt your data and they'll charge you a fee to unencrypt your data. So that's the first extortion. The other is that they'll say, oh, and we've downloaded your data, and if you don't pay us a fee, we're going to release it, or we're going to sell it, we're going to expose it somehow. And so sometimes it's one or the other, or sometimes it's both. And the unfortunate thing is that there's no guarantee, even when you pay the fee. It's more often than not, you'll get the encryption key that works, but it's not 100% guarantee, because they're criminals and they're not reliable or dependable, but they want to be just reliable enough to get you to think, oh yeah, I should do this. The thumbnail image that you see there is not the speaker that spoke to our audience, but it is a member of the FBI Seattle Cyber Task Force. It's Supervisory Special Agent Chu. And when you get this presentation, it will have a link that you can go to that will show you his video explaining this dual extortion component of ransomware. Another thing that we're seeing is new hire spear phishing scams. And this is where a new employee is targeted by somebody that's posing as an executive or a supervisor and asks them to do something that they shouldn't, whether it's buy gift cards or divulge their credentials. Yet another one is MFA fatigue attack. And this particular link links to a case study that we put together on the Uber attack that happened late last year. But MFA fatigue, we talked earlier about multi-factor authentication, and when somebody logs in, well, MFA fatigue starts with stolen credentials. So they may have your password. And in this case, in the Uber attack, they had an Uber employee's password and they logged in. And when they logged in, it triggered a multi-factor authentication request. His phone blew up and it said, "Are you trying to log in?" And the Uber employee did the right thing and ignored it. Well, the attack goes on that they try to wear you down. They keep logging in again and again and again. So it becomes a nuisance with the hope that you'll just click it out of frustration or exhaustion or fatigue. And even still, that victim did not click on it. So he did the right thing. But then they took it to the next level and they called him directly. And they said, "Hey, this is Kevin in the IT department. And I know your phone is just blowing up on you right now, but it's just a glitch in our authentication system. If you accept one of those requests, the problem will go away." And that's where they got him. He accepted that because he felt he was instructed to. He didn't, and it's hard to blame him because he passed a couple of the tests, but what he didn't do is contact the IT department and say, "Hey, is this legit?" through some other channel. Instead, he just responded after that message. And from there, they were able to move laterally within the organization and get access to resources that they shouldn't have. And again, if you, when you get this presentation, there's a link, but it kind of tells the same story that we've seen here, that I've just told there. And then finally, I mentioned it earlier, but ChatGPT or artificial intelligence makes this hurdle of speaking like a native English speaker is kind of a thing of the past, or, bad grammar and bad spelling is not going to be as common in the future as it was in the Nigerian prince scams and other bad emails that you've seen in the distant past. So jumping around to other subjects, there was another in the prompts that we had for this meeting, there were questions about password managers, and we're agnostic about products. So we don't, for the most part, we avoid when we can selling products directly, and enables us to make recommendations that we feel are in our client's best interest. But when it comes to password managers, we just offer a general recommendation that we are in favor of using password managers. And if you're not familiar, that's a vault. It's a database where you can store all of the 60 or 70 passwords that you need to keep track of. And it can also help you generate secure passwords. And all of those passwords then in turn are protected by one, hopefully very long, very strong password and multi-factor authentication. So there is a risk you're putting all your eggs in one basket, but they are very secure systems and hopefully protected by a very secure password and multi-factor authentication to keep the bad guys from getting access to that. But they can assist you with generating strong and long passwords. They can help you store passwords securely. And one thing that came up for us recently too, and I've seen this happen a few times, you can also within these applications specify an emergency contact or a legacy account if for some reason you're not available. And frankly, it's a great it's a gift you can give to your loved ones to not have them have to fight with your social media accounts to get access and shut down, or your bank and those things as well. So it's kind of a hidden and not often promoted benefit, but that's another benefit of password managers. And before I move on from passwords, I did want to say one other thing, kind of a little bit of a tangent here, but there's been a change in the conventional wisdom about passwords over the past few years. And it used to be that we talked about passwords as being like your underwear. They were, they should not be exposed. You shouldn't leave them around where people can see them. They shouldn't be shared. And third, they would say, and you should change them regularly. Well, over the past few years, that last part, I mean, you should still change your underwear regularly, but your passwords, NIST has come out with new recommendations, and they say now that it's actually more effective to not expire your passwords, to instead create very long, strong passwords and change them when it's appropriate if you're concerned about a compromise. And the reason is that if you have to roll your passwords every 90 days, and if you're like me, you probably have 50 or 60 password protected accounts, you're going to start reusing passwords, or you're going to come up with schemes that increment passwords that aren't very secure. And so for that reason now, the current recommendation is you make a long password, and length is better than complexity, but you make a very long password and don't have these routine changes every 30, 60, or 90 days. And so now we kind of segue into IT operations. And there was a question before in one of our prompts for this presentation. It was, when should we bring IT in-house versus outsourcing, and how many users is too many to manage yourself? And I will say, I'll acknowledge at eXp Technical, we provide outsourced IT support. So we have a little bit of a bias, or we are pro taking advantage of outsourced resources. But also there's some things to think about, because sometimes people think, well, it's a number of users or it's an expense, but it's a little bit different than that. You can think about like a typical journey that an engineering firm might go through in their technology capability maturity too. They might start with 2 or 3 people working out of a basement, and the founders are the IT department, and they do all of the setting up new computers. And typically that continues for too long in this sort of chaotic, not very mature stage of their process, where maybe now they're 15 or 20 employees, and still one of the principals is setting up new computers and addressing end user and desktop support issues. And at that point, oftentimes that's usually when they start deciding, well, we need to bring somebody in to do IT support. And so they engage with an outsourced IT support provider. Their capability maturity advances, it becomes more standardized, more repeatable, more routine. They're following best practices, and that's great. And the firm grows to be 60, 70, 80 employees. And then the CFO says, oh my gosh, we spent $100,000 on outsourced IT last year. We could hire someone for that. And at that point, the real challenge, it's not the dollars or the number of employees, but it's more, you have to think about at what level you would be bringing someone on board, because now the organization is mature and your needs are varied and the roles in your IT department are varied. And an outsourced provider can provide a lot of those different roles. But for example, there's a strategy component, aligning technology with your business objectives, might be regulatory compliance and other things of that nature. And that may need an executive that's been in that role for many years, or it may need, somebody with an MBA or a JD, an attorney, if there are concerns about regulatory compliance. There's also a planning and implementation component, kind of a director role in managing IT operations within the organization, and specifying initiatives and timelines and all of the project labor associated with that. And then there's a maintenance role of maintaining the back-end infrastructure, and a support role of supporting individuals as they interact with the computing environment. And so the challenge for that 80-person firm is, where do they hire? Because, if you might have a lot of expenses, but you're not going to find somebody that's, inexpensive support desk sort of resource or help desk kind of that point in their career. They're not going to be qualified to guide your organization on strategy. And similarly, you're probably not going to find somebody that's got an MBA and many years in executive roles that wants to crawl around under computers or wants to help people connect to a printer. And so typically what we see is that organizations consider the level that they want to bring in, and it may be when you have, say, 25 or more hours in one of these quadrants, when you have a fair amount of work to do, that you might bring someone in on staff to perform that role, and still may be augmented by an outsourced resource. And one of the reasons why you might want to augment is that oftentimes it's non-technical people trying to manage that tech resource or to hire that resource, and they might not be very well qualified to vet that individual in the hiring process, or to manage them and give them a career path as they work with the company. And so for that reason, it often makes sense to supplement with an outsourced resource that can provide mentorship, training, as well as being a point of escalation and fulfill some of these other roles in these other quadrants. The other thing that I'll mention is that when you bring someone on board, of course, there's overhead. They attend company meetings, they go on vacations, they take holidays, they take sick days. and you have to provide a computer and a desk and also all the tools that they need to do their job, which might be ticket tracking and monitoring and other things that an outsourced IT support provider would have as part of the service that they offer. So you know, the balance there is that outsourced services are expensive by the hour, but they're fully utilized when you use them, and they can provide you this greater depth and breadth of expertise that you might need that you might need to take advantage of. And then finally, if you do, there's risk everywhere, but if you do bring someone on staff, the risk is, and it's pretty common that someone comes in at that junior level, if you don't provide a great career path for them, they're likely to leave in a couple of years, and you don't want all of your, you know, institutional knowledge, all of what they understand about your environment to go away with them. And that too is where that hybrid approach might work and might provide some continuity through that kind of turnover, or maybe provide someone on your team that can provide mentorship and give that person a career path. And then there are, you know, I should also acknowledge there are a few clients that we work with that have hundreds of employees, and they may be hiring more at that strategy end of the spectrum. And it may be that they outsource all the routine maintenance and all of the project work and end user and desktop support. So we see it both ways. I'm not saying there's always a role for outsourced IT support, but I am saying that it doesn't really come down to a head count or even a dollar spend. It's more the functional role is a big factor. And I think at that point, I'm going to hand the baton to Tony, and he'll jump in on the more technical details.
Thanks, Kelly. Nice job.
No,
all right. Hi, everyone. Just reiterating Kelly's initial point he made, there was a sort of long list of things that people were interested in learning about. So I've tried to encapsulate those in like 3 or 4 slides, and I'll jump around a little bit. And I want to be cognizant of time. It's 12:32, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So I'll go fairly quickly and make notes if you want clarification on anything. So one of the items was internet service options and the differences and why you might choose one over the other. And I've picked the 3 sort of major options. There's others as well, of course. But going from top to bottom, we'll start with satellite, and you'll see this first bullet point repeated, is that this type of connection is asynchronous, which means it's not the same speed up and down, or your download speed is not the same as your upload speed. And this is typical of satellite, cable, DSL connections. And why does that matter? Well, let's say you're in the office and you're browsing the web, streaming a video, connecting to your email, which is on Office 365. That's all download. That's all using your download capacity. When you then go home and you work from home and you're remotely accessing the office, let's say you have servers, you're using a VPN, maybe a remote desktop, that traffic is leaving your office outbound up to the internet, upload speed, and that's where that becomes important. So having a synchronous connection, like a fiber connection at the bottom, is important, more important for an office, a business type of environment, especially when we talk about remote access and hybrid work, which of course is all very common today. Some other things going back to the top about satellite, typically pretty variable speeds, even if they give you, what the specs are, it's still going to vary within that, and reliability obviously is variable as well. Cables kind of in the middle, also almost always asynchronous. You get even up to a gigabit down these days, but not very much upload, maybe 35 megabits at the tops. So something to consider, even though gig speed is the buzzword these days. Most likely, if you put that in your office, the upload or the remote user experience is still going to be fairly slow. Cable and other similar types of products are also what we call broadband or shared services. So if there's other people in your building, in your neighborhood that are using the service, that may impact your speed because they're not guaranteeing that you will get the full bandwidth that you're subscribing for. And, cable tends to be more reliable than a satellite type of connection. And then finally, a fiber connection, these can come in two flavors, what we call dedicated internet access or DIA, and then the more broadband offerings. They are both typically synchronous, so same speed up and down. The dedicated options will guarantee you that you will get the full bandwidth that you subscribe for up and down. And of course, they tend to be more expensive. And then your broadband type connections, in the Seattle area, CenturyLink or Lumen Fiber Plus service is very common amongst our clients. And that is considered a broadband. So while we see great performance on those, in theory, if again, there's other people in your building or even in the area that are heavily using the service, it could impact you. But fiber tends to be highly reliable. The next topic is wireless connectivity, and understanding wireless, what the different components do. And I've broken this down into two sections. So this first slide here is more of a business, in the office implementation of wireless. And this is a larger environment, most likely. And I'll talk about what a smaller one might look like in a minute. But starting at the top, there's the internet. And everything outside that box you see there, the dotted line, is outside the company network. So, the internet, the router that's typically provided by the internet service provider and provides that connectivity up to the internet. Not something you have to buy, not something you have to manage. Then we come down to the firewall. That is almost always something that your organization will buy and support, a company like ours or your IT department will manage. It has two connections typically. One's outside the network on the public internet, the other's private inside the network, and allows you to connect out through it. And of course, filters all the bad stuff, in theory, hopefully, out before it lets it in, or protects you from as you go out onto the internet. The next step down is your firewall's typically connected to a switch, which is like the plumbing of your internal network, connects everything together. And then connected to your switch, we finally get to the wireless component. So these wireless access points, and there could be one, or there could be many spread across a big office, provide the wireless connectivity. Now, in a smaller environment, single space, small office, 10, 15 people, it's possible that this wireless access point functionality could actually be built into the firewall. But again, in a bigger environment, you spread these things around the office. Typically, they're on the ceiling, and they provide what we call a mesh network. So you can roam around and it will hand you off from one of these access points to the other and keep you connected as you move around and allow you to access back to the switch and out to the internet. Or if you've got servers, I don't have those represented here, you could connect to those servers as well. Which just brings us to the last part of this, which is the wireless networks. Sorry, Kelly, go back while I just finish this point. On your wireless networks, you can broadcast multiple what we call SSIDs. Essentially, they're different networks. So you can have a company network that has access to servers and internal resources, but then you can also have a second one, and this is all handled by the same equipment that provides a guest network. And that network, which you can provide the password to people who come into your office, clients, etc. That is typically allowed to go to the internet only, and we do what's called device isolation. So that cell phone or that laptop can't interact with any other devices on the network. All it can do is go to the internet, nothing else. So can't get to your servers, can't get to some other person, another client's in the office at the same time, can't interact with their device. And so this is a pretty typical setup. Okay, so the next slide is talking about now home, which was another question, home networking or home wireless, what's the right setup? So I've broken this down into small, medium, and large. Partly depends on the size of your home, but also typically as you go up through these, you get better performance, better connectivity. So starting on the left, often this type of device, all-in-one cable, modem, router, wireless access point. If you have fiber in your neighborhood, it's often a similar thing, or maybe the ISP provides the router, but they also provide some kind of multifunction device that does the wireless and the routing. It does everything, basically. Provides you connectivity to the internet, but also allows you to connect wirelessly. And all these router type devices include, I didn't mention it here, some kind of basic firewall to protect you. If you're in a larger house, the problem with this is there's just one of them. You know, you put it wherever your cable's installed or your router comes into the house, and it's fixed there. And typically they're not particularly strong type of signals, or you get too far away from them. And so that's when you might want to step up to a more dedicated or powerful device. So in the middle, in this scenario, we've got the cable modem. Incidentally, Comcast and others will try and rent you these things for, you know, whatever it is, 10, 15 bucks a month. You can go and buy one for 100 bucks. They'll provide you with a list that they support, and then you can stop paying those monthly fees for renting the modem. Periodically, you might have to upgrade that thing every 2, 3, 4 years, but you'll probably still save money. And then you can add on a more powerful router and wireless access point. These things typically have, you know, multiple antennas sticking out of them, and provide broader and faster coverage in the house. And then moving on, far side, large house or multi-level house, we go another step further and we buy a mesh wireless solution. And so that typically is comprised of multiple access points, now getting back to more similar to an office environment. And you know, one of them is playing that router, firewall, and access point role, but then there's others scattered around the house. They all connect together, so wherever you are, you have a strong signal. Oh, and then I've got Google Nest, Netgear, Aero, which got purchased by Amazon. These are all good brands of the mesh solutions mentioned on the far right there. And then I'll spend a couple of minutes on this slide, and again, prompted by questions and information we received at the outset here. I tried to roll this into what we call modern IT management. So basically, I think the question or the information requested was really about cloud managed or remotely managed solutions that are out there these days. And we see lots of these, and they're growing in use and functionality and security. So things like firewalls, wireless access points, network devices can be managed remotely in the cloud. Power devices, things that, you know, batteries, things that keep your servers up and running, again, report to the cloud, can be remotely managed. A ton of the cybersecurity tools these days use the cloud and artificial intelligence in the cloud, because you know, the compute power needed to drive some of these security tools, and especially software, isn't available locally on the server or on the device. So they leverage the cloud and the power of the cloud's computing in order to better detect issues, viruses, compare it with a database of known, you know, attacks. So security solutions are using the cloud a lot. And then finally, Internet of Things, IoT devices, so cameras, you know, washing machines, you know, fridges, TVs, those type of things, again, are typically these days internet connected and easy to use and manage anywhere in the world. Just going down the list of points on the left there, as well as, you know, being easy to manage remotely through the cloud and powered through the cloud. They're typically intuitive, easy to manage, easy to deploy, and if well designed, not always, they can be secure. There's definitely a lot of publicity around some of the more consumer devices like the TVs and, you know, washing machines and thermostats that maybe aren't as secure, and are ways that people can get into your network. So keep them up to date, as with any software, right? Patch your servers, patch your Windows desktops, keep your Internet of Things devices up to date as well, and you'll stand a better chance of staying secure. And I think that brings us to the end with 15 minutes for Q&A.
Wow, you guys did great on timing. So much content. All right, so thank you guys. Are you able to hear me? I'm not calling from my phone, so I just want to make sure.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So we've got quite a bit of comments in the chat, but does anybody have any questions before we read the chat? Barry.
Wasn't sure if we could say them or just put them in the chat window. So one
Yep.
of the things with the home internet setups that we've run into is people that are trying to work from home often complain about their connectivity, that, you know, things are glitchy, that they get dropped from meetings and so forth. And I know a lot of that has to do with their own internal infrastructure, but do you have some spec guidelines that you would recommend to somebody who's working from home, so that they could compare that to what they have maybe from Comcast or whoever? You know, when you say a router, well, there's a lot of difference between, you know, little tiny router or something with a lot of channels. And, you know, do you have like a kind of a minimum specs that you would suggest for somebody who's trying to work remotely from home when they have kids and thermostats and refrigerators and all that?
I don't have something written down, but I would refer back to those vendors I put on my slide. So, and, you know, don't buy the cheapest one. So for example, you know, the Netgear Nighthawk, I think, is a well-known brand for a single device with lots of antennas and high capacity. The other thing to look out for, especially because everyone's using Wi-Fi these days, is Wi-Fi 6, right? Is the latest standard. So if you see Wi-Fi 6 device, typically they are higher bandwidth and better connectivity, stronger signal strength, just more advanced. So that's something to look out for. They typically, again, they're the latest, so they're more expensive, but it's usually worth investing in something like that. And then again, if people have larger homes, the mesh solutions really make a huge difference. So being able to put that access point, that second access point, in a different part of the house. And those things usually come in packs. So you might get a pack of 2 or a pack of 3, and then you can even add on pretty much as many as you like. And the Google solution is great and easy to use. Or if you're not a Google fan, the Amazon Aero, but there's others. Netgear has a mesh solution, Orbi, it's called. But if you stick with those, you know, don't just sort of go on Amazon and search for mesh, because you'll get tons of third-party, you know, knockoff solutions. So stick with the sort of known brands. Even if you don't buy from Best Buy, let's say, look at Best Buy or some of the local US retailers, look at what they offer, or Walmart or whatever, and then go back to Amazon and pick that specific product. That's a good tip. Hopefully that helps.
And it's not just the size of the home, right, Tony? I mean, I've come across problems with like chicken wire in the walls that breaks up a wireless signal. That can be a factor too.
Yeah, I mean, in some extreme situations, like, you know, Kelly was saying, there's interference or obstructions. Sometimes you have to run cables. That's the other thing, because these mesh solutions, they they hop from one device to the other to create this mesh network. But if they can't, communicate well between the two devices, sometimes there's a need to run some cabling. It's pretty rare, but it is possible.
We have a fireplace and the chimney.
Right, brick
It
wall.
blocks a lot of signal. We know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Brittany, you're on mute.
Sorry, technology. Ironic. All right. So any other questions before I start reading the chat? I think I'll just start reading, seeing if anybody else. So Carrie, I saw that. All right. Well, actually, it looks like there's just so I like that Stacy, she wrote, I instituted a policy that I'll only change someone's bank account if they request it in person. So I like the best practices. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll
so
just piggyback on that actually. So that is a common one we see. I think someone put that in the chat about, payroll redirection scams and impersonating employees. That's definitely one. The other protection we recommend is invoice redirection, and someone contacting maybe even your client or you trying to redirect an invoice. Hey, we have a new bank account. Can you wire the money here instead of there? So having some kind of dual verification for wire transfers or changes, that type of change, verbal, double signing of checks or things like, verbal verification that this wire should be changed to this account, that type of thing. And again, back to what Kelly was saying, talk to your customers, talk to your clients, and have a policy coming from your AP department saying, hey, you should feel free to contact us. This is how we do business. This is what you should expect from us. If you see anything outside of that, it's probably not legit. Give us a shout.
Almost fell for one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, clients got hacked and sent out one of those emails to change their banking info. And thankfully, we don't do a lot of EFT payments, so our own internal processes slowed down that. And by the time it got there, his email had been recovered and all that. But it was very convincing. Yeah,
they really can be, because they've typically actually got access to an account at that point. So they are sending from a legit account. They've got historical access to emails. They've got copies of invoices. So
that's what did it. He had a copy of our invoice. Yeah.
I've got a couple questions. So let's see. So when there is a phishing scam, or it's clear that someone's been in the email, what are some of the best practices? Is it also, besides notifying the team and the bank or whoever, changing passwords? Is that effective? And obviously.
Yeah. We always say that the first thing, if you can, to everyone in the organization, change your password right away, immediately. Do that straight away. And then contact IT in that order. Or if you can't change your password for some reason, obviously contact IT right away and get that password changed. And that goes, and that's the type of situation. Obviously, we recommend these days not changing passwords regularly, but that is the type of occasion when we would recommend it. There's other things as well. And then we we have a checklist of things to check, because the other things that they'll do once they get, almost immediately when they get access to the account, they'll set up forwarding to an external account. So usually they'll get in, create a rule to forward all the emails to a Gmail account. So we check for forwarding. So that's on your checklist, check to see if forwarding's been set up. They'll create rules in Outlook to hide their activity. They'll redirect emails into uncommon folders like the RSS feeds folder, in Outlook or some, or just delete stuff, send it to your deleted items. So again, go in to your Outlook on your computer, but also, and it's not the same, which is annoying, Outlook on the web has another set of rules. So go check for rules that have been set up to hide their activity.
By
and
their
then
activity, do you mean like sent email and things like
send
that?
emails, or even emails that people have responded to the emails that they've sent,
That whole
and
thread.
then they're trying to hide that conversation so you don't see it while they interact with your client or your partner or whoever it might be.
I've actually had that happen, so that's actually a good reminder.
You know,
yeah, and
if you don't mind me interjecting, that also goes back to our webinar. If you have experienced that legitimate business email compromise where someone has gotten into your email, most recently we had an FBI agent, and there is the ICCC website from the FBI. They would appreciate if you report those as well anytime there's been a business email compromise.
yeah, even if there was no financial loss.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
And then just so you
that's
know, these days on Microsoft 365, you can actually at the tenant level disable forwarding, so that email, even if someone tried to set up a rule to forward all your email to Gmail, Microsoft wouldn't allow that. So
amazing. I love that. It's funny that you mentioned the checklist, because I was curious if you guys had like an annual checklist, or kind of like even if it's like doing a risk assessment annually and a security awareness training. Like, do you have a resource that you could share with us that they could use for their firms?
that is a good question, because we do have an internal tiered, so it's sort of small, medium, large checklist. It isn't publicly available yet, although Kelly and I have been talking about making something like that available. So I guess we'll have to get back to you on that.
Do you accept bribes?
Yeah, I mean, it's all common guidance, and the 5 things that you saw. I mean, it's about, I think it's 30 or 40 different items on there. And like I said, in a sort of tiered approach. So, if you're only 5 people and you only have X budget, then you do these. But we'll look into maybe a consumable version of that. But to your point about an annual checklist, it really is an iterative process. There's no end to this, because it's constantly evolving, and there's new technologies, new things you can do every day. We're just about to roll out multi-factor authentication on all our clients' servers, for example, even just to log in. And, there's in the past that was difficult for an organization like us. In a perfect world, there's no shared admin accounts, but when you're working with an IT service provider or an MSP, typically they need to have shared admin accounts. So, and it was hard to roll out MFA, but those, gradually technology advances, those things can be overcome. So, yeah, there's no end point. You got to stay up to date and refresh.
I love that. I know we're getting close on time, so I think one other important one might be stolen equipment or lost equipment. You lose your laptop and you have VPN and all the passwords. And so what are some best practices for that?
So hopefully, if you have mobile devices, smartphones, laptops, they're encrypted before, they get stolen or lost. That's something we absolutely recommend, so that, if they do fall into the wrong hands, even if they pulled the hard drive out, they couldn't read the data. We do typically, when these devices are lost or stolen, unless you have the password on a yellow sticky, on the laptop, then hopefully they can't log in. But the other thing, if we can do, is if these devices come online, if you've deployed endpoint management solution, mobile device management, then typically they can be remotely wiped as soon as they come online. So again, those are things you have to do ahead of time and have in place. but those are best practices you can implement before these type of things happen that allow you to take action if they happen. And it doesn't hurt to change passwords. I mean, a stolen device doesn't mean there's a password compromise, but that is the type of event where it would be like, you haven't changed it for 18 months, let's change your password just for good measure.
Yeah. Well, that is amazing to know. So I'm guessing if anybody were interested, you would be able to be hired for security awareness training. Do you come in, or you do that remotely as well? You have both options.
So yes, so the security awareness training that I mentioned earlier is a course that's available. It's online, it's video lessons, and it's completely free. If you want to engage with us directly to train your staff and to meet in person, we'd be happy to do that too, as a consulting engagement. So that's available too. And frankly, even our workflow for creating these courses is pretty easy and quick. And so we may be able to customize for individual organizations or for a group. If there's a common threat that your organization, that SDA is seeing amongst your members, maybe we can add a special module too that might be unique to that group, but make that as a private course. And again, everything at EXP Academy is completely free. All of that training there.
And I'll include a direct link to that too. And for anybody else who's got to hop off, we've still got a couple more questions. So if you need to hop off, we'll definitely get you a copy of the recording. And we've got our next BPE in March. So mid-March, and it's going to be our first in person. So we'll send that out and get a copy of the recording, PDF. Have a great long holiday weekend, and everybody else who wants to hang on for a couple minutes more, we'll continue on. Eileen had a question. So she says, what are the top questions we should ask a potential IT advisor? That's a good question.
Do you want to take it, Tony, or do you want me
I
to
was going to go for it.
Well, oftentimes you want to learn some of the obvious questions are about availability and response time, depth and breadth of expertise, experience in your industry, if they work with other firms in your industry, if they're familiar, maybe not exactly in your industry, but supporting a similar technology stack. Those are all important questions. One that people don't ask often enough, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but is, if we're not delighted, what happens if we want to leave? And the reason why I mention that is this too has come up a couple of times in the last few weeks where it's been a contracted service with a punitive cancellation clause, in some cases multi-year contracts where you have to buy out of the multi-year contract to get out of it. And that's you're handcuffed to a support provider that you're not getting great service from and you can't afford to leave. It's a nightmare scenario. Those are some of the things that come to my mind. Tony, I'm sure you have others to add to that as well.
Yeah, those are all great. The other ones I would recommend asking about are, a lot of MSPs these days have packages, right? So it's per user per month, per computer per month, but there's a limitation as to what's included. So get very clear on what's included and what is extra, and you'll pay hourly for. There is definitely a trend in the industry to try not to come on site as much as possible. And that would be extra if they have to come and they want to do everything remotely. So that's, get clear on what's included and what isn't, and so that when you're going to be, going off the fixed fee plan. And I'm sure Kelly is about to comment on.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't do it that way.
Exactly. That's where we are outliers. We don't offer that sort of fixed fee managed services plan. And we are big fans of regular site visits as well. There's a lot we can learn when we're on site that we can't discover remotely.
Well, and quite frankly, we're a small business serving small and medium-sized businesses, and it really is about relationship building at the end of the day. And it's really hard to build a relationship well over time with only ever doing this and only over fixing something with a remote control tool. And so, yeah, I won't belabor the point.
Yeah, along that same vein, I was curious about cyber liability coverage, which we just got this year. And so I was just curious, what is often excluded and things that we should keep an eye out for, and how to determine kind of the best policies out there and adequate coverage for, I guess, those two small and medium-sized firms?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you're asking what's excluded from coverage?
Yeah, any exclusions, anything weird that should be there that's not kind of like a homeowner's policy where you're like, yeah, that should be something, but it's special.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, like with most things, it depends on the carrier and the policy. So I don't have a definitive answer to that. One thing, though, we have encountered and is worth making a note of is that there's been a couple of situations where we've had an incident. One of them was like we picked up a client, but one was an existing client. And we, as we do, acted as quick as we could to get them back up and running, because that's our job, right? We got to get our client back in business. But when it came to the claim, the carrier, the insurer said, oh, you should have contacted us before you did anything. You weren't authorized to spend that, all that time recovering them. We're not going to cover all of that. So reporting as quickly as possible is highly recommended so that you get clarity on what you're going to get back, because you'll undoubtedly spend money on recovery and you need to understand how much of that will be covered. So that's a big one.
That's a really good tip. So, I mean, have you guys, so you've obviously encountered a couple of these situations. So would you say $1 million in limits is adequate for, is it, I heard like rule of thumb is 20% revenue kind of coverage. So if you're making 5 million a year, 1 million, is that a good rule of thumb?
Yeah, I think so. That, oftentimes these days the ransoms, I don't think we've ever had a client pay a ransom. Can't think of one, but they're not massive sums of money. So that's typically good. And then recovery costs, as long as you have good backups and, your IT department or your IT provider is well prepared and not going to come anywhere close, to that sort of sum. So you should be, I think that's a good rule of thumb.
Nice. Just reading to see if there's any more. You guys got a lot of kudos. Great program, very good information. You're the best by Carol Wanda.
Thanks, Carol.
Yeah, she tells me that too.
It's mutual.
We have Ken in the office right now, and he came by and he said, "Are those my people?" And I said, "Yeah, they're your people." They are. There was something about someone supposed to be going on vacation, and I don't know. What was that, Tony?
Yeah, I'm looking at my watch now.
Yeah, we're keeping Tony minutes, 8 minutes past the time. So, any final burning questions for anybody? Okay, I have one more. So, if the owners or the president and principals, if they don't use a password program, obviously recommending that, what happens if there is a medical emergency or, God forbid, a death, and kind of getting passwords and kind of just delving through that mess, like laptops, you usually don't know. Like, obviously, there should be one keeper of the passwords in the firm, right?
Well, that's a good question. So you're talking about a scenario where the owner or principal of the firm has, so, and are you saying that maybe in that scenario there's passwords that no one else knows or has access to?
Exactly.
And they don't have a password manager.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, from the IT side, the way we operate is we record all passwords and in a password management tool. So from the IT administration side, that should never be in the hands of head of one single person. But from if it's the principal and it's like bank accounts or I don't know, something that they maybe exclusively have, usually in those I don't know if I've come across an actual death or anything like that, but you can usually go through a recovery process with the correct paperwork to regain access to whatever account that might be. Now, it could be a real hassle, but it's definitely doable.
Yeah.
That's without a password manager. You're contacting the bank directly and going through the recovery process, which
Yeah.
if you have a password manager and you have that emergency contact or a legacy contact where someone else can get access, you save your loved ones all of that hardship of contacting your bank and your social media accounts and everything, your whole online life or digital
Right.
life.
Yeah. So again, I mean, it's kind of like preparing. If you can prepare ahead of that by putting things in place, that's obviously the best scenario.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, collecting the right evidence of ownership, all of that stuff is what you'll have to do.
Well, I think so. We need to get Tony on vacation. We've got to get you on that dance floor. So.
Yeah, wasn't there supposed to be a dance routine? I missed the dance routine.
Okay, I gotta go. See you.
I'm not going to stop the recording until we get it on there. So, Tony, you gotta.